The city screamed, and I didn't listen. New York was a symphony of chaos, honking taxis, shouting vendors, the endless hum of ambition, and I'd learned to tune it all out. A survival skill honed over years of navigating its streets alone. Until he crashed into my life. A hurricane in designer shoes, demanding I bend to his every whim. My name is Ethan Caldwell, 28. An alpha who'd rather fix a broken engine than deal with people. I grew up in the Bronx, where dreams were as rare as quiet nights. By day, I worked as a mechanic in a grimy shop off 10th Avenue. By night, I kept to myself, dodging the city's glitter and grit. Alphas like me were supposed to be dominant, commanding, but I'd never cared for that stereotype. I preferred solitude until Julian Vanderbilt, the spoiled Omega heir to a real estate empire, decided I was his next project. It was a Tuesday in October, the air crisp with autumn's bite, when Julian strutted into my shop. He was 24, all sharp cheekbones and tailored confidence. His scent lavender and something dangerously sweet hitting me like a freight train. "You're Ethan, right?" he said, not asking but declaring, his voice smooth as the cashmere scarf draped over his shoulder. He held a sleek black car key fob, twirling it like a toy. "My Maserati's making a noise. Fix it. Now." I wiped grease from my hands and sized him up. His dark hair fell in perfect waves, and his green eyes sparkled with the kind of entitlement only money could buy. "Shop's closing," I said, turning back to my toolbox. "Come back tomorrow." His laugh was sharp, like broken glass. "Do you know who I am?" He stepped closer, his scent clouding my head. "I don't wait." I should have kicked him out. I'd dealt with his type before, rich kids who thought the world spun for them. But something in his gaze, a flicker of desperation beneath the arrogance, stopped me. "Fine," I muttered, grabbing the keys. "What's the problem?" "It's rattling," he said, vague, like he'd never bothered to learn how cars worked. "Just make it perfect." "I have a gala tonight." He leaned against the counter, watching me like I was his entertainment. The Maserati was a beauty, a sleek beast that didn't belong in my greasy corner of Manhattan. I popped the hood, expecting a quick fix. But the engine was a mess, neglected, like it had been driven hard and cared for little. "This isn't a 1-hour job," I told him, wiping sweat from my brow. "You've been ignoring it too long." He crossed his arms, pouting. "Then work faster. I'll pay whatever." I snorted. "Money doesn't fix stupid." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't snap back. Instead, he lingered, scrolling through his phone, stealing glances at me. I ignored him, diving into the engine. But his presence was a weight I couldn't shake. When I finally closed the hood, it was past midnight. "Done," I said, tossing him the keys. "Don't wreck it again." He smirked, slipping a $100 bill into my hand. "You're good at this. I might keep you around." I should have laughed it off, but his words stuck like gravel in my boots. The next day, he was back, not with the car, but with a proposition. "Be my driver," he said, leaning against my workbench, his cologne dizzying. "My last one quit, and I need someone reliable." "I'm not a chauffeur," I growled, shoving a wrench into my toolbox. You are now, he said, tossing me a contract. Name your price. I stared at the paper, the numbers blurring. It was more money than I'd seen in a year. I could have said no, walked away, kept my quiet life. But something about Julian, his audacity, his vulnerability hidden beneath layers of privilege pulled me in. Against every instinct, I signed. The first week was hell. Julian was demanding, capricious, dragging me to galas, boutiques, and rooftop bars, treating me like an extension of his will. Ethan, carry this. Ethan, wait here. Ethan, don't talk to them. I gritted my teeth, hating how his voice could command me, how his scent made my alpha instincts hum. But late one night, after a party where he dazzled everyone but looked hollow, he slumped into the back seat of his town car, his mask slipping. Why do you stay? He asked, voice soft, almost lost in the city's hum. You hate this. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his eyes catching the streetlights. Money's good. I lied. He laughed, bitter. You're a terrible liar. That was the first crack in his armor. The first time I saw the real Julian, not the heir, not the brat, but a lonely Omega trapped in a world that worshipped his name but ignored his heart. I didn't know then that I'd spend the next months unraveling him, or that he'd unravel me. The job wasn't just driving. Julian's life was a whirlwind of expectations board meetings, charity balls, and photo ops, all orchestrated by his father, Richard Vanderbilt, a cold alpha who ruled New York's skyline like a king. Julian was his only heir, an Omega expected to charm investors and marry strategically. But Julian rebelled in small ways, skipping meetings, flirting with strangers, and dragging me into his chaos. One night, he insisted we detour to Coney Island. Of all places. The boardwalk was deserted, the air salty and sharp. He kicked off his shoes, running toward the ocean, his laughter wild. Come on, Ethan, he called, spinning under the moonlight. I followed, reluctant, my boots sinking into the sand. Why here? I asked, watching him twirl, his jacket flapping. Because it's real, he said, stopping, breathless. Not like my life. I didn't know what to say. He looked at me, eyes bright with something I couldn't name, hope. Maybe. Or defiance. You're different, he murmured. You don't care about my name. I care about my sanity. I shot back, but my voice softened. His scent was everywhere, pulling at me, and I hated how much I wanted to close the distance between us. That night, he fell asleep in the car, his head against the window. I drove slow, watching him, wondering why someone with everything looked so lost. I didn't realize I was starting to care. Weeks passed, and Julian's demands grew absurd. He'd call at 3 a.m., insisting I drive him to a diner for pancakes, or make me wait outside clubs while he danced with strangers. Yet, the more I saw of him, the more I noticed the cracks. He'd smile for cameras, but his eyes were empty. He'd flirt with everyone, but his touch lingered on me brief. Accidental. Electric. One evening, at a fundraiser in a glittering midtown penthouse, Julian was in his element, charming billionaires with practiced ease. I stood by the wall, invisible to the elite, watching him work the room. But when a sleazy investor got too close, his hand grazing Julian's waist, I felt a surge of protectiveness I couldn't explain. Before I knew it, I was across the room, pulling Julian away with a growled excuse. "What was that?" he hissed, once we were in the hallway, his sense spiking with irritation. "He was out of line," I said, jaw tight. Julian stared at me, then laughed, soft and disbelieving. "You're jealous." "I'm not," I snapped, but my face burned. I wasn't supposed to feel this way, not for him. Not for anyone. Alphas didn't fall for omegas like Julian. They controlled them. Or so the world said. But Julian wasn't someone to control. He was a storm, and I was caught in it. Later, in the car, he was quiet, his usual bravado gone. "No one's ever done that," he said finally. "Stood up for me like that." "Your world's full of sharks," I muttered. "You need better bodyguards." "I have you," he said, and the weight of those words settled between us, heavy and unspoken. The tension built slowly, like a fire I didn't notice until it was blazing. Julian started finding excuses to keep me close, not just as a driver, but as a confidant. He'd ran about his father's expectations, his fear of being a pawn in the Vanderbilt legacy. I listened, saying little, but every word he spoke chipped away at my walls. One night, after a fight with his father, Julian showed up at my apartment in the Bronx, soaked from the rain, his eyes red. "I can't go home," he said, voice breaking. "Please." I let him in. My tiny studio a stark contrast to his penthouse world. He sat on my couch, shivering, and I handed him a towel. My alpha instincts screaming to protect, to comfort. "What happened?" I asked. "He wants me to marry some alpha from Chicago," Julian said, staring at the floor. "A business deal. I'm just a contract to him." I clenched my fists, hating the pain in his voice. "You're more than that." He looked up, eyes searching mine. "Am I?" The air crackled. I wanted to say more, to tell him he was infuriating and brilliant and worth more than his father's empire. But words failed me. Instead, I sat beside him, our shoulders brushing. And for once, he didn't push me away. By December, I was in too deep. Julian's life was a maze of privilege and pressure, and I was no longer just his driver, I was his anchor. We stole moments between his chaos, coffee runs at dawn, quiet drives through snowy streets, his hand brushing mine in the car. I told myself it was nothing, that an alpha like me and an omega like him could never work. But every touch, every glance, said otherwise. Then came the gala that changed everything. It was at the Met, a sea of wealth and power. Julian was radiant, but I saw the strain in his smile. Halfway through the night, he grabbed my arm, pulling me into a quiet corridor. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered, his voice raw, "pretending I'm okay with this life." "Then don't," I said, my heart pounding. "Walk away." He laughed, bitter. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," I said, stepping closer. "But you're stronger than you think." His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the world stopped. Then he kissed me fierce. Desperate. Like he'd been holding back for months. I kissed him back. My hands in his hair. The city fading around us. It was reckless. Dangerous. But it felt like the only true thing in New York. That kiss broke everything. Julian and I stumbled into something neither of us was ready for, a connection that defied the rules of his world and mine. We didn't talk about it. Not at first. We just kept moving, stealing moments in the shadows of his glittering life. A touch in the car. A whispered conversation in a diner. A glance that said more than words ever could. But the world wasn't blind. His father noticed Julian's distraction, his absence from key events. One night, Richard cornered me outside their Park Avenue mansion, his alpha presence suffocating. "You're a liability, Caldwell," he said, his voice ice. "Stay away from my son, or I'll ruin you." I held his gaze, my own alpha instincts flaring. "Julian's not your property." He smiled, cold and sharp. "You'll learn." The threat hung over me. But Julian was worth it. He was changing less reckless, more open, like he was finally seeing himself beyond his father's shadow. One night, in a dive bar in Brooklyn, he told me about his mother, an Omega who died when he was young. "She wanted me to be free," he said, his voice soft. "But I don't know how." "You're figuring it out," I said, my hand covering his on the table. "One step at a time." He smiled, a real one, and I felt my heart crack open. I was falling for him, hard, and it terrified me. Alphas weren't supposed to feel like this, vulnerable, exposed. But Julian made me want to rewrite every rule. Trouble came fast. Richard hired a private investigator. And soon, photos of us kissing in an alley, laughing in a park were on his desk. He summoned Julian to a meeting, and I wasn't allowed inside. When Julian emerged, he was pale, his eyes hollow. "He's sending me to London," he said, voice flat. "To fix me." I grabbed his shoulders, panic rising. "You don't have to go." "I don't have a choice," he said, pulling away. "He'll destroy you, Ethan. Your job, your life, he can do it." "I don't care about that," I said. But he shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I do," he whispered, and walked away. For days, I tried to reach him, but his phone was off, his apartment empty. I was losing him, and the city felt emptier than ever. I went back to my old life work. Solitude. Silence, but it wasn't the same. Julian had changed me, and I couldn't go back. Then, a week before he was set to leave, Julian showed up at my shop, his eyes wild. "I'm done running," he said, grabbing my hand. "Come with me." "Where?" I asked, heart racing. "Anywhere but here," he said, his voice fierce. "I don't care about the money, the name, any of it. I just want you." I stared at him, the spoiled Omega who'd turned my world upside down. He was choosing me, choosing us, over everything he'd ever known. It was insane, reckless, and I'd never wanted anything more. "Okay," I said, pulling him close. "Let's go." We didn't have a plan, just a beat-up car and a desperate need to escape. Julian packed a single bag, leaving behind his designer suits and his father's expectations. I drove us out of New York at dawn, the city shrinking in the rearview mirror. For the first time, I felt free not just from the city, but from the walls I'd built around myself. We headed north, toward Maine, chasing the promise of quiet towns and open skies. Julian was different out here, lighter, his laughter filling the car as we sang along to bad radio songs. But the weight of his decision followed us. He'd cut ties with his father, but Richard Vanderbilt wasn't the kind to let go. In a small motel off the highway, we finally stopped running long enough to breathe. Julian sat on the bed, his hair messy, his eyes bright. "I've never done this," he said, almost shy. "Been real." "You're doing fine," I said, sitting beside him. Our hands found each other, and when he kissed me, it was soft, deliberate, like a promise. We made love that night, not as Alpha and Omega, but as two people who'd found something worth fighting for. The next morning, reality hit. Julian's phone buzzed with messages from his father's lawyer's threats to cut him off, to freeze his accounts. He deleted them, but I saw the fear in his eyes. "What if I made a mistake?" he asked, staring out the window. "You didn't," I said, pulling him close. "You chose yourself." He nodded, but the doubt lingered. We kept moving, staying in cheap motels, living off diner food and each other's company. I taught him how to change a tire. He taught me how to dream. But the world wasn't done with us. Richard found us in a coastal town, his black SUV pulling up outside our diner. He didn't come alone. Two alphas in suits flanked him, their presence a silent threat. "Julian," he said, ignoring me. "This ends now." Julian stood, his hands shaking but his voice steady. "I'm not going back." Richard's eyes flicked to me, cold and calculating. "You think this mechanic can give you a life? You're a Vanderbilt. You don't belong in this filth." "He's more than you'll ever be," Julian said, stepping in front of me. "I love him." The words hit me like a tidal wave. I'd known it, felt it, but hearing it aloud made it real. Richard's face twisted, but before he could speak, I stepped forward. "He's not yours to control anymore." The standoff ended with Richard storming off, but I knew it wasn't over. He'd try again, and we had to be ready. Life on the run wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We settled in a small Maine town, renting a cabin by the sea. Julian got a job at a bookstore, charming customers with his wit, while I fixed cars at a local garage. It was simple, unglamorous, and perfect until the letters started. Anonymous notes slipped under our door, warning us to leave. I knew Richard's hand was behind them, but Julian refused to run again. "This is our home," he said, his jaw set. "He doesn't get to win." I admired his fire, but I was scared. Richard's reach was long, and I'd seen what money could do. One night, I found Julian staring at the ocean, his face drawn. "What if he's right?" he whispered. "What if I'm not enough without the Vanderbilt name?" I turned him to face me, my hands on his cheeks. "You're enough. You've always been enough." He kissed me, fierce and desperate, and I held him until the fear faded. But the threats didn't stop. A brick through our window. A slashed tire small. Petty acts. But they wore us down. We decided to fight back. Julian reached out to his mother's old lawyer, a kind Omega who'd known him as a child. She dug into Richard's business dealings, finding cracks in his empire's shady deals. Tax evasion. It wasn't enough to destroy him, but it was leverage. We met Richard in Boston. Neutral ground. He sat across from us in a sleek office, his face unreadable. "What do you want?" he asked. "Freedom," Julian said. "Leave us alone, or your secrets go public." Richard laughed, but it was hollow. "You're playing a dangerous game, son." "I'm not your son anymore," Julian said, and I'd never been prouder. The deal was struck. Richard would back off, and we'd keep quiet. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We returned to our cabin, stronger, but the scars remained. Julian started writing, pouring his heart into stories about love and rebellion. I read every word, amazed at the depth of his soul. One night, as we lay in bed, he turned to me. "I used to think I needed New York," he said, "but all I needed was you." I kissed him, my heart full. "You've got me." The seasons changed, and so did we. Julian's writing took off, his stories published in small journals, each one a step toward his own voice. I opened a garage, fixing cars and building a life I'd never dared dream of. But Richard's shadow lingered, a reminder that freedom came at a cost. One day, a letter arrived, not a threat, but an invitation. Richard was hosting a charity gala in New York, and Julian was invited. "He's testing me," Julian said, crumpling the paper. "He wants to see if I'll crawl back." "Then don't," I said. "But if you want to go, I'm with you." He looked at me, eyes fierce. "Let's show him who we are." We drove back to New York, the city looming like a memory. The gala was at the plaza, all chandeliers and fake smiles. Julian wore a simple suit, no longer the polished Heir, but he shone brighter than anyone there. I stayed by his side, my hand on his back, a silent promise. Richard approached, his smile tight. "You've changed," he said to Julian. "I've grown," Julian replied, his voice steady. "You should try it." The room watched, sensing the shift. Julian wasn't his father's pawn anymore. He was his own man, and I was his partner. We left the gala early, walking through Central Park, the city alive around us. "I used to hate this place," I said, my arm around him. "But it brought me you." He smiled, leaning into me. "Worth it." Life wasn't perfect. Richard still wielded power, and the world wasn't always kind to an alpha and omega who defied its rules. But we had each other, and that was enough. Julian's writing grew bolder, his stories touching hearts across the country. I built a life I was proud of, not just for me, but for us. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our cabin, Julian turned to me. "I used to think love was a cage," he said. "But with you, it's freedom." I pulled him close, my heart full. Always. Years later, Julian's first book was published, a novel about a boy breaking free from his father's shadow. Finding love in unexpected places. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was honest, raw, and his. At the launch party, in a small bookstore in Maine, he read a passage aloud, his voice steady, his eyes on me. The crowd applauded, but I only saw him. Afterward, we stood outside, the night crisp and clear. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, his hand in mine. "You did it yourself," I said. "I just drove the car." He laughed, pulling me into a kiss. The world had tried to tear us apart: money, power, prejudice, but we'd won. Not by fighting, but by choosing each other. Every day, our life grew roots. We bought the cabin, planted a garden, adopted a scruffy dog named Max. Julian wrote, I fixed cars, and we built a community of misfits who saw us for who we were, not what the world expected. Richard faded into the background, his empire irrelevant to our small, stubborn happiness. But the past wasn't gone. One day, a reporter called, digging into Julian's story for a feature on fallen heirs. Julian hesitated, then agreed to the interview. "Let them see me," he said. "The real me." The article was kind, painting Julian as a rebel who chose love over legacy. It didn't change the world, but it changed him. He stood taller, his smile brighter, and I loved him more for it. One spring, Julian surprised me with a trip back to New York. "Not to stay," he said, grinning. "Just to remember." We walked the streets we'd once fled, hand in hand. The city hadn't changed, still loud, still chaotic, but we had. We stopped at the bench in Central Park, the one from our poster, now weathered but still standing. Julian traced the carved words, his fingers lingering. "Love defies pride," he read aloud, his voice soft. "It really does." I kissed him, right there in the heart of New York, the city that had tried to break us but instead made us whole. We weren't just an alpha and an omega, not just a mechanic and an heir. We were Ethan and Julian, two people who'd found home in each other. As we left the city behind, driving toward our quiet life, I realized something. I used to ignore everyone in New York, tuning out the noise to survive. But Julian taught me to listen to him, to myself, to the possibility of a life I'd never imagined. He was my chaos, my anchor, my everything. And in the end, that was the greatest rebellion of all, choosing love. Choosing us, in a world that told us we couldn't.